tell you if it's playing or not. I can now. There we go. Well, I honestly don't know. I honestly don't know if that worked or not. So, well, folks, good evening nonetheless. Sorry about that. Um, I couldn't tell if you were able to hear what just played, but we tried in any event to to give you something special, but it may not have worked out. But anyway, there is something special to offer you in spite of that if it didn't work. And I'm so glad that you're here. I'm certainly glad to be here. Tonight is a night, it's the first Wednesday of the month. And what we do on the first Wednesday of the month is Stephanie Pavlantos, or Pavlantos, comes our way. How do you pronounce it, Stephanie?
Pavlantos.
Pavlantos. Okay, well then I'll put it.
Mm-hmm.
I'll put it up there on the screen based on the way you said it. It's the softer sound of the A. It's not. It's not the
That's
long A.
right.
It's the short A. I
Mm-hmm.
guess. Okay. Well, I cannot honestly say if the intro to your podcast got aired as I had hoped to do. It's hard to mix audio and video. I know it sounds strange. Anyway, but you are doing
No,
something new, and it should be, if it is, it's happening now, right?
it's not. Well, the background is happening now. Yes, I'm doing the interviewing and um, the editing and the audio and all of those things. I'm learning a great deal. So, but yes, all those for my podcast are happening behind the scenes. I haven't actually launched it and have it made known to the public, but I have given you my first episode and I've given my family the first episode to listen for me. So that's as far as I've gotten.
Well, you sound really wonderful. I'm looking at this beautiful studio microphone. Uh,
Yes.
so you got introduced to a whole new world. I mean, first you put a camera in your hand, and you get
Yep.
introduced to a learning curve there. Then you get this audio gear. Um,
I know.
is it impacting you, or are you impacting it at this point?
Both, I guess. I had to get a new computer, so I have a new computer in my corner, a desktop, because this little laptop that I've been using is just getting overused to the point that I've got all my audio and video and pictures on here. And it's like, oh, I need a bigger computer that will hold this and a better graphics card and everything. So yeah, I'm learning a whole bunch of new things and new technology. And my 25-year-old son says, "You've got a better computer than I do now," and that's not right. So, oh well.
Well, you got some help. You sought some counsel
I
in
did.
getting a
You
mic, and
did
you
help
got.
me.
Well, I wasn't talking about me, but just
Oh
the
yes.
first thing you've got to select the microphone, and that's not uh, as easy as it sounds. Any microphone other
Right.
than the built-in mic is a better microphone. In other words, you can't use a
Hmm.
built-in mic. So that was the first gulp, and this stuff costs money. But
It does.
then you have to learn how to record, and you have to learn how to use
Yes.
Audacity and things. So you
Yes.
downloaded Audacity. I guess that's the favorite
I
program
did.
for amateurs.
Hmm.
How daunting was
Well,
that?
it was easy enough. And, well, it was very daunting at first. I was just kind of like ready to give up, honestly, because I seemed like whatever I did, I made it worse. instead of better. And so finally, I reached out to you a couple times, and then the first time I reached out to you, you were like, "Oh, I'm in the studio. Call me anytime." Well, then I realized I had recorded it incorrectly. So I recorded it only as a video, not as audio. So I didn't even have an audio to work with.
Hmm.
And so that was useless. And then the next time I reached out to you, we worked it out and I got on, and despite all of our plans, you stuck with me, and I think we worked for about an hour and a half, almost 2 hours, just going through some of it, a little bit at a time, and I finally caught on. And so it was a little daunting, but now I feel like um, I can handle what I'm doing. But if there's something like one time I thought, okay, I'm going to see if I can do a voiceover. Nah, that didn't work at all. So like, okay, I'm not there yet. So,
Yeah. Well, I want you to remember these moments because a year from now, you'll look back at it and say, I can't believe, it's sort of like riding a
hmm
bicycle. You've got to fall
hmm
down and skin your knee a little bit, and
right.
you got to have the training wheels at first, but the day will come, and it'll come quicker than you think,
Yes,
that it will be
I
second
know.
nature to you.
Yes, and I get so nervous too before I'm about to interview someone. And I'm just like praying and I'm asking the Lord to give me peace and make sure, because my fear is getting on here. I've got a person sharing the screen with me. We're talking on Zoom and I'm recording and I don't know what to ask next. I'm just like, what do I ask? I ran out of questions, or they went a different direction and I wasn't prepared for that. So some of those I just have these little fears like, what if this happens or that happens? And one of the men I talked to today, he's a prolific writer, he's a speaker. I mean, he's got his own ministry. He's been doing it for many, many, many years, and he's very good at what he does, and he knows the word of God. And he was just like, let's just pray, Stephanie, and let me pray for you. And so I think he sensed my nervousness, and it was the first time I was talking to him. But oh my goodness, once he just started talking, it just like boom. And he just knew his material so well that it just flew out of him. And kind of, I want to say, I guess it flowed out of him. It just was like so natural. And he was so easy to talk to. And I was like, oh, why did I get so nervous about that? So it's, it's just a step. It's just an improvement. Just keep improving, I guess, with each person I talk to.
Well, it's hard for me to understand being nervous in a program that's not live. I can more understand it in a live program like this one because
I
once it's
know.
done, there's no reeling it in. But in a recorded program, you can fix it in post production. Now, let me ask you a question.
Mhm.
Have you gotten your dog clicker yet? I guess not.
No,
And you
because
may
I
be
don't know what that
wondering,
is.
well, it's a little thing you hold in your hand, click click, and it just makes a clicking sound. It's a dog clicker.
Yes.
Go Google it because you're going to be
Okay.
getting one. Oh yeah, yeah, you're going to own a dog clicker.
Oh,
Trust me. Yeah, it's a fact.
okay.
Um,
Okay.
People
Okay.
that are involved in working with recording and editing audio stuff, you get a dog clicker, and when a
Mhm.
mistake is made, you click the dog clicker. This way,
So you can hear it.
when you edit it, you can see that dog clicker spike, and that way you'll know, oh, here's the mistake. So you go back and you go to, it gives you a point at which you can make the cut and start over. So
Yes.
so
I
get
know. I understand that because it's very interesting. Sorry. When I look at the audio, looks a very certain way. And other things, even this that click with your tongue, it looks a
mm-hmm,
certain way on audio.
mm-hmm,
And so it's like, oh, there's a click and I remove it or I silence it. And
right.
there's an I go and I remove it. And it's just funny. It's like certain words have a very unique structure about them without knowing the proper way, I guess, to put that. But And then even to see, I told my husband this and he kind of laughed at me, but I said, my voice looks so different compared to other voices. He was like, I
Well,
wonder why that is. You know, he's
well,
like, yes.
it's looking at a world through a completely different lens. And another thing that you're going to find is the skill of the speaker. Okay, you can
Hmm.
see, oh, a sentence started and a sentence ended and a
Hmm.
sentence started. You'll see it. Where
Hmm.
the less skilled speaker, it's hard to tell where one thought begins and the next. And for you, it won't matter that much because you're playing the whole thing. But when I'm like doing a highlights
Hmm.
video,
Hmm.
people are nervous, so they throw in a lot of and yeah, and they just kind of keep
And
momentum.
and
Uh, and and then they'll start the word. How do you separate the from the actual thought? And when you see it on the spectrograph or whatever you call that thing,
right.
talented, trained voices learn to speak in sentences with pauses. And someday, if I keep doing this long enough, I'll be one of them. But until then, uh, but I have a live program, and of course, dead air is something we can't stand. You can't have dead
I know.
air, and I have a tendency just to fill it with anything. While a lot of times I'm just trying to marshal up the next thought because you don't have a
Hmm.
script. So
Right.
you're
Right.
just
I
kind of
understand
stalling.
that.
Yeah, you're kind of just
Hmm.
stalling, with
I have a
ums and
notebook and I just like make all these notes. And sometimes, even when they're talking, I'll make a note like, oh, I want to go back to that point, just so that I have things in front of me to keep it from just. And you're right. I mean, I can edit that silence out, but just to keep the conversation going, and or even just not to forget, because it's funny. I mean, everyone's different. So you get somebody who really, and I'm sure you know exactly what I mean, but when they get in their rhythm and they're getting into what they really want to talk about and explain, they might take a pause, but they keep going. And there's nowhere to like interject something. And
mhm.
so now, like in my Zoom audio, I've learned how to separate my voice from their voice, record them separate.
Right.
And so if I do get in there, like, and they're not done, I can take myself out. I can silence my voice in that section, because there was one time or not even once, but a few times I have started to talk because this guy was from Canada and there was a definite lag in our voices in the
Oh, okay.
time between,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
so when I would start to say something, then he would start at the same time, because my voice, there was a pause between before he heard my voice again. So we did that a lot, and I would try to go in and just remove my part and my
And
over talking
right.
him.
Slide everything over. Yeah. And if you're recording each
Mhm.
voice as a separate recording, which is what, and until I talked to you that day, I didn't know Zoom could do that.
Right.
That's a major feature for podcasting. But uh,
Mhm.
the problem is, and it's not a problem. The good news is we can interview people on the other side of the world
We can.
today. That would not have been. I mean, even 20 years ago, this would
That's
absolutely
right.
been out of the question. Out of the question.
That's right. My first podcast episode will be a teacher from Jerusalem, and we
8 hours
talked,
away,
right?
eight time zones
And
from here.
and it was funny because, as I told you before, I had to go in there, and he spoke very softly. And here I am, I'm sounding really loud next to him when I listen to it.
Mm-hmm.
But luckily, in Audacity, there's a way to amplify his
You
voice.
can.
So, and yeah, and then having it on a separate track, and I put my hands this way because on the screen it looks like his is above and mine's below his, and so
Mm-hmm.
there's separate tracks running.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can just highlight his track and I can amplify it
Mm-hmm.
to match mine.
Right.
And
To where
it's
you're
really
both.
cool.
How, I. Yeah, it's kind of a secret still, but yes, your first. I have heard your first episode. I'm special. I am.
Mhm.
And the first you mentioned Australia, and I thought, well, gosh, Australia, that's, gosh, it's already tomorrow there in the middle of the day
Mhm.
here. But it turns out he was in Jerusalem, which I work with some
That's
people
right.
in Israel, and I know that there's an 8 hour difference, or is it 8 or 9? Depends on which time of year it is.
7.
7. I mean 7 or 8
That's right.
hours
Mhm.
difference. So let me ask you a question. Once people hear this podcast,
Mhm.
soon I presume, what time of
Mhm.
day did you do that?
Well, actually, it was it was noon for me because he was 7 p.m. So it wasn't hard for me at all, but because he works in a church over there in Jerusalem. So I assumed I left it up to him what time he wanted, and I gave him what time I was available, and I said, I can do it before you go to work, which would be more like midnight for me, or I can do it at noon, which will be about 7 o'clock for you, or anytime. You just let me know. And he came back with 7 o'clock my time and noon your time would work. And so
Mm-hmm.
I said, okay. So it worked out beautifully, and it wasn't too late or early for me at all.
Right. So we've got an Ohio girl talking to a man in
Mhm.
Jerusalem with an Australian accent. This is
That's
truly
right.
an international presentation. Okay, this
It
is
is.
around the
And it's
globe in
so
every sense.
good. Yes, and he was so good. And he's such a good teacher, and, when we got off when I shut the recording off, he just encouraged me. He was so kind, and I've had a lot of the people I've interviewed have been very, very encouraging, and his little bit of caution was, just ignore the hate mail, just ignore it. He goes, "You get in, you look at your computer, and when you see something's hate, you just hit delete. You don't even read it. You just hit delete because you're gonna get it. You're gonna get pushback." And another woman just, I mean, I talked to this one young woman. I would say she's about 30,
Yeah, that's young
and
to us. Yeah, that's
yes, it is. It is. Um, and she told now this wasn't even on air because I wasn't even recording it yet. She just wanted to talk and get to know me before she
mm,
kind of, told her story. But she ended up telling me some things. And I am literally sitting there with tears in my eyes as I'm talking to her. And because of the things she was telling me, which I'll explain. But before we hung up, she was like, I just want to encourage you because what you're doing is you're going to get pushback from this. You're going to get attacked for the stand you're taking for Israel and for Jewish people like myself. I never thought about it, and I certainly it's not something you look for or expect. It just happens, I guess, if people don't like what you're saying. And there are things I'm sure that are gonna come up that people aren't gonna like because it's a whole long conversation, but there are a lot of things that we don't do right. And I'm not saying that every Jewish person, especially, and when I talk about Jewish people, I'm talking about the Messianics more so because they have the same faith in Jesus as we do. But they have a knowledge and an understanding of scripture because that they speak Jewish. I'm
mm,
sorry, because they're Jewish and they speak Hebrew,
mm,
they can see things in scriptures that we can't. And knowing the culture and understanding their history, they see it differently. And because their passion about some things, then that's going to strike some Christians within the church. And when I talk about Christians, I honestly am talking about Gentile believers.
mm.
It's just going to rub them wrong, and it can be an opportunity to push back and to become offended, rather than an opportunity that some people aren't going to look at it as an opportunity to learn. And ponder on these things and take them in and pray about them. And I talk about that in some of my in one of my podcasts today that I mean it's not aired yet, but in the one I recorded, I was like at the end, I'm like, I hope that you will just ponder these things. I hope that you will listen to this broadcast and re-listen if you need to, and pray and pray and pray into these things you're hearing so that you can let the Holy Spirit speak to you about what he wants your response to be to this information you are learning today. And just one of the things, to a Jewish believer, and really to any Jew, when we talk about Jesus Christ, we are talking about an unknown God to them. It is not Jehovah. It's not Yod He Vav He, because we aren't using the terminology. Now, as a Messianic, they understand who we're talking about. But to them, they're kind of, they're sharing in a sense. If we're talking about a Messianic believer who is a Jewish believer in the Messiah we call Jesus, if we're talking about that group of people, then we calling him Jesus Christ is actually calling him by a very Greek name. And
Mm-hmm.
that's not the name they use. And
All
that's
right.
not his name to them. Okay. So there's that. And they understand that we're coming from a Gentile point of view. But there's this little, like this one woman just told me, she goes, it just bothers me to hear Christ because he is the Jewish Messiah. He is
Mm-hmm.
not the Greek Christ,
Right.
in a sense. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm not trying to put that down and put people who use Christ down. But if you hear a secular Jew, he'll just say, is that his last name? Because it means nothing to them.
Mm-hmm.
And if we want to reach out and talk to Jewish people and bring them to their Messiah, then we have to learn to use the right terminology. We have to talk about Jesus as their Messiah, not Jesus Christ. Yeshua, HaMashiach, is Jesus the Messiah, as we would say. And not that you have to learn it in Hebrew, but if you talk about the Messiah, talk about him as he's the Messiah, the Jewish Messiah, because that's just such a more, it's a word that has been, that God told them about way back in Genesis, that he was preparing them for. And I don't know if that makes sense. It's just it makes a lot of sense to me, and I see the passion that these men and women have for their Messiah, and they want us to have that passion for the Messiah, not just for our traditions.
It's I won't call it culture war. It's culture clash. It's that
Mm,
they're bumping up against one another, and there will be friction. It's not. It doesn't have to
mhm,
be destructive, but something
mm-mm.
that you're saying is speaking to me at a very, very deep level. You began this podcast journey probably, well, you tell me, out of a sense of duty and obedience and faith,
Mhm.
more than a sense of zeal. Is that fair?
The zeal came later. The
Mm-hmm.
zeal came later, I would say, once the Lord really cemented it and had me see it the way he was seeing it, in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
Not that I see the whole picture by any
Okay.
stretch of the imagination, but just the picture he gave me in a sense of how it was going to look and how it was going to play out, how it was going to begin. That got me excited. But up until that point, I was dragging my feet um
Yeah.
terribly.
Yeah.
So,
Well, you're making a point that I think needs to be made. And I'm going to be making it more than once, but I'll take this opportunity to make it. And what got me reflecting on this, Stephanie, is when I was invited to be on faculty at the Well Creatives Conference up in Michigan in
Okay.
April. Okay. On get this, marketing.
Mhm.
I literally called them back and said, you must have dialed the wrong number. Have you seen my YouTube channel numbers? I mean, if I knew anything about marketing, it would reflect on the scoreboard, so to speak. No. Well, anyway. All right. So here's the point. Here's the message. And you just said it, but you said it in a different way. Sometimes God calls us into something, and when He does, He doesn't reveal all that there is,
Right. I
because He
agree.
knows that if He did reveal all that there is, we would be too scared and we would not do it.
We would run the other way.
We would run the other way. Now, think about, and you just mentioned, that you're called into this, and now that you're in it, now that you're down that road, not even a block,
Right.
you're realizing you're going to be hated for this.
Yeah, that's not a pleasant thought
You
at all.
that was not on your radar at all. But what if God would have told you, I want you to do something, and you don't know how to do
Right.
it, it's going to be complicated, and you're going to be hated for it. How would that impact how would that impact our those spiritual crossroads that we come to? If we could see
Right.
everything
Right.
along the way. So one thing is keep your eyes focused on the prize. I have come to believe in
Yes.
all my heart that God has intersected me with so many writers and authors who have a calling from God to write. And they, in obedience and even zeal, say, "Yes, Lord, I'll do that." And then they say, "Well, how do you do it?" Well, the first thing you do is you have to go to a Christian writers conference. Well, Stephanie,
Right.
that costs money and that takes time. That's a commitment.
It does.
For a lot of people, that's a major obstacle. I mean,
Right.
and so you say, well, okay, Lord, I said I'd write a book. If this is okay, I'll do this. But there's your first detour is, whoops, got to go to all right. Well, then they get there and they meet all these wonderful people, but they also find out, oh, you've got to have platform. You've got to do a blog.
Right.
Oh, you've got to have a website.
Right.
Oh, you've got to do a podcast. Oh, you've got to get an
Exactly.
agent. And just detour after detour. How many people are on your newsletter? So, how many subscribers to your what newsletter?
Right.
And I
Right.
can only imagine these people saying, God, I didn't sign up for all of this.
That's right.
They may
That's
not
right.
publicly admit it, but I'm sure that the thought crosses their mind is, God, I just wanted to write a book.
Right.
I said I would
I
do
know.
that. Okay, so they dread it, and I've had many conversations, and I'm glad that Doug Carter is in the chat room right now, because he said something that profoundly impacted me. That's guiding me through this. All right, you've heard, you've got to have a podcast, you got to have this, you got to have that. But it's so if I'm going to teach this class, what am I going to do? Say you need to have a newsletter, you need to have a podcast, you need to have a blog. I would not be offering them anything that they have not heard before. But Doug said something. He said, "There's obviously a disconnect somewhere, or more people would be doing it." And part of my calling, my mission, is to somehow sow the seeds or raise up legions of Christian podcasters, Christian bloggers, and because we are insignificant in the marketplace of ideas, not because we don't have the ideas. Well, actually, we have the only truth, but it's because we're not trying. But there's a disconnect. So here's what I'm coming to figure out, and God is speaking to
Okay.
me through your experience. Is yes, God didn't tell us everything involved when He called us. He just called us, and we have to. But we need to see these as opportunities. How often have I prayed, Lord, increase my territory? While
That's right.
unclaimed territory is abundant all around me. We don't have a newsletter. Well, we're going to have a newsletter. And we need to embrace, literally embrace these detours and obstacles. What if, consider this, Stephanie, he called you to write, writing and teaching, that's your bread and butter. But now you've gone into podcasting. What if your podcast winds up reaching far more than your writing and teaching ever did? What if you started doing a blog? These are all ways of increasing our territory. Don't resist them. Embrace them. And
Right.
we need to build a community of Christians who will support one another. That, you need to know what kind of microphone to get? Well, here's some stuff. You don't have to go into this without some coaching, without some mentoring, without some discipling, and
Right.
some people that are on your side. I would not
Right.
suggest you call sweetwater.com and say, "What do I need?"
Right.
Or
No.
you're into cameras. What if you called a photography store, B&H or some of
Right.
those, and said, "What
I
do I
know.
need?" Well,
I
yeah,
know.
you would have a very good you'd have a very good rig, that's for sure. But you may
Yeah.
also have
And
a
no money.
mortgage. Yeah. So
Right. I mean, it's amazing because you're right. I mean, had I not gone into writing, and I'm not finished with it at all, but after I after Jewels of Hebrews came out, I started feeling this little nudge, and I resisted this little nudge. And I mean, that was in 2020. And the more that people would suggest, oh, you need to do you need to have a YouTube channel, you need to have a podcast, you need to share these things. And I was like, no, 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 thank you very much, thank you. But I know I'm not doing it. Not comfortable. And it's so funny because one of the men, pastors I interviewed, he goes, may I ask you a question? And after we were all finished, and I said, sure. And he goes, why aren't you recording the video? And I just said, oh, well,
because you
let
were
me tell
wearing your
you.
pajamas. Okay, I no.
No. But I said, well, I went to a podcast book, what was it called? Boot camp. That's what it was. Podcast boot camp at a for him. He doesn't know, any of the conference names. So I just said at a writers conference, and I took a class by a woman who has years and years and years of experience in broadcasting, radio, you name it. And of course, that was Linda Goldfarb.
Mhm.
And I said, the first thing she said was to find your strength, and that you need whatever podcast you do, whatever you're doing, it needs to come out of your strength. What is
Mhm.
your passion? What is your focus? And so right there, I'm like, okay, so I know what this is. I know what that is. And then she said, if you are not comfortable being on video, then do not start with video. Start with audio. Get comfortable with audio until you're comfortable enough to make the leap to all video. And I said, so that's why I'm doing audio, because
Mhm.
I said I get too self-conscious. I get too like I get, what's the word I'm looking for? I start wondering, am I smiling? Am I frowning? I start getting preoccupied with all these other thoughts about what other people are seeing instead of what they're hearing. And I'm like, and I don't like that. I don't like going there
It
and feeling that way. So I'd rather just start with the audio.
I think that was very sage advice, and it wouldn't surprise me that that came from Linda
Mhm.
Goldfarb. Um, and
Mhm.
I think by following that advice, what it will do for you is you'll learn to train your voice. You will learn to
Mhm.
ask questions. And in fact, a lot of times I'm not asking a question. I just make a statement. I call it teeing it up. But you'll develop a
Right.
style of your own. And once
Mhm.
you develop that style, now you become more relaxed, you become more comfortable, which means you're
Mhm.
even better at it because now you come across much more
Mhm.
authentic. You can always tell the beginners, they're
Right.
nervous, they're
Right.
read I can't see them, but I can see that they're reading right off a sheet of paper, you know.
Mhm.
But once you get that developed, then doing a video is not a far leap. It's not the far reach that it would
Right.
have been to start there. For those of you
Exactly.
out there that are bloggers, you do a blog. Well, your blog could be made into a
Mhm.
podcast very, very, very easily. You've
Mhm.
already done the work. You've already got the
Right.
content. So I'm
Mhm.
optimistic that whatever I'm going to be more of a motivational speaker at this
Mhm.
conference.
Well, you're
It's
very
not
much an encourager, so
right.
that would be good.
Yeah, the how tos aren't that important yet because until you
Mhm.
make the decision, until you overcome the fear, and once you
Mhm.
get committed and you know that there's people here who will help you, and yes, you can afford this. I think, as Doug said, I'm looking for that disconnect. Obviously, there is one.
Mhm.
They don't need to be told you need to do a blog, you need to get a website, you need to do a podcast. They've been told that,
Right.
and it's not working. So let's not engage the clinical
Mhm.
definition of
Mhm.
insanity. But you've helped me tonight. You're affirming some thoughts that are very much on my mind. Deployment, Stephanie, you targeted August. It is August, and I know you're well on the
Mhm.
way. I went to stephaniepavlantos.com. Didn't see anything there about a blog, a podcast.
Yeah,
Oh,
that's coming this week, so I'm
okay.
gonna put that on.
Tell
I
us,
actually bought a couple don I'm sorry.
just give us the
I bought a
deployment
couple
schedule.
domain. Okay, so I bought the domain name, jewelsofhebrews.com
Good.
and graftedjewishroots.com so that I can send people to those and it goes right to my website. And I mean, in that I learned, from Victoria. I don't even know how to say her last name, but she
Doerstock.
she talked about that. Thank you. So I learned that from her and how important that was because then when you have a hard name to and it takes up like half the page,
Yeah, I know. I
for
know.
your
Yeah.
then it's easier if you already have a book that they can go to
Mm-hmm.
jewelsofhebrews.com,
Right.
or you
Exactly.
have your podcast name and they can just look that up and
Mm-hmm.
find it on your website. So that was the first thing I did. So excuse me. So next I'm going to put out a blog about my podcast and explain it. And then, of course, the first one will be on my blog as well as on other podcast providers, platforms.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that was another thing, you have to buy rights to the hosting platforms so that they will put it on Apple, on Spotify, on iHeart, and
Mm-hmm.
whatever, all
Mm-hmm.
those out there. So that was another thing. And so, I had expense after expense after expense. And so, you know, the Lord talks about counting the cost, and let me see. Let me tell you, I was counting the cost of
It
all
adds
of
up.
this,
Yeah.
and what can I do? What can I do cheaply? And so Audacity, being a free program to edit, was the free. I went there with the free, and then just how can I pay for these things as inexpensively as possible, and just
Yeah.
finding
Well,
whatever.
yeah. Welcome to my
So
world. They nickel and dime you to
right.
death, and
And I know.
It's $30 here, $15 there, $50 there,
I know.
200 a year
I
there,
know.
and post office box, and just
I
on,
know.
and it adds up very.
I know.
It's death by a thousand cuts.
I know. I
But
know.
there's good news. Again, if we could raise up an army of Christian podcasters, we could have fewer channels but more content. You could have a
Mhm.
guest of, we could reciprocate. If you had five
Mhm.
people with platforms, you could literally have interviews with 500.
Mhm.
There's so many things, but see, this involves teamwork, folks, and this is what gets excited. This is what drives me. Is if we
Mm.
work together, there's things that we can do that we could never accomplish by ourselves.
That's right.
And I try to make the pjnet.tv platform available to any Christian. I mean, that's the
Mhm.
qualification, any Christian.
Right.
But you could interview say you interview somebody, you could offer them saying, well, hey, this sounds like something pjnet.tv audience would,
Mhm.
and you could refer them to me. I could refer people to
Right.
you. We've had 305 different people, different
Wow.
names on our programs,
Wow.
and we can help each other and we can act together. It's
Mhm.
just very exciting. So, but
It
deployment
is.
is and I was going to ask you, how about music? I love the music you chose for your intro and outro. Did
Thank
you
you.
did you purchase that, or did you just hijack it?
I did purchase that. No, 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 I purchased it. So, I went through so many songs, and I was just like, there's so many genres, and so I was looking for something that was upbeat, but not
Not contemporary. Yeah, I
too
know.
over the top.
Yeah, yeah, I know.
I didn't want it to sound like I was going to a parade,
Mm-hmm.
but I didn't want it to sound like I was going to a funeral,
Yeah,
and, so just something there in the middle, and as soon as I heard that one, I'm like, "I like this one. This one is
yeah,
the one that fits me, it fits my personality, and I think it fits the tempo of what I wanna do, which is teach,
yeah,
and even when I bring on my guests, I we have an hour, but I spend about the first 15 minutes just talking and comparing notes, and I remind each of my guests just for the sake of, because if I don't, it becomes a monologue. So I kind of just said I want this to be a discussion. And one person I talked to, I had two today, and he goes, well, what are you going to ask me? And I said, "Well, what, and I know this man, so I'm like, "Well, what are some of your favorite topics? I mean, we've talked about a lot of different things, and which one of those are your favorite?" And he's like, "Oh, you want me to talk about a topic? I thought you wanted to talk about me." And I'm like, "No, this is I want to know your story, and I'll ask you your story." And it would turned out very well because he didn't become a Christian until he was in his 40s. So he laid out the whole gospel message, which I thought was beautiful because anybody who's not a believer, if they tune into him, they're going to hear, his sarcasm of what he thought church was and what he thought all of this, these radio pastors and who they were. But yet, when the Holy Spirit moved in his life, everything changed, and it was just such a beautiful story, and I can't wait for people to hear that. And but then we just started carrying on a conversation about the Bible and Hebrew idioms. Who knows what Hebrew idioms are? We have our own idioms, but do you know that the Hebrew language has idioms? And when you read them, most people look at it like, I'm sorry, I have no idea what Jesus is saying right here. Sometimes Jesus was talking about current events, and sometimes he was talking using his own, idioms and such of the language from his language, and knowing the difference between some of those. Do you know the story of the Good Samaritan was not a parable, but a true life story that they knew?
no, I didn't.
It was something that truly happened, And he was reminding them. So when somebody asked the question, so who's my neighbor? He goes, hey, it would have gone something like, the story, the man who was laying by the side of the road, who helped him. So he was reminding them of this story. It wasn't a parable, but most of the time it's under parables in our Bible.
Yeah.
But it wasn't a parable.
And I'm curious
And I
why
mean,
we
and
call them
knowing
parables. They're really just stories. Why is the word parable reserved for biblical stories that Jesus told?
that's a very good question, and I have an answer for you. All parables, now Jesus spoke in Aramaic, and so did his disciples and the people he spoke to. But every parable that's in the Bible, we can only find in the Hebrew language. All parables were written in Hebrew. They are only found in Hebrew literature. They are not found across the board like in other Semitic cultures or other Middle Eastern cultures. And it was just something that the rabbis used, and they were hundreds, if not thousands of years old. And the
Okay.
parables Jesus told were not all of his own. They were actually what he learned as he was learning to be a rabbi.
Well, even the parables have Hebrew roots. How about that?
They do.
They were grafted into the Aramaic, and Oh, okay. Well, Stephanie, I'm glad we had some extra time tonight, and you've been very
Yeah.
generous in sharing, and we're excited for you. I'm going to, as we exit, I'm going to try to. I'm not sure that intro from your podcast played, so I'm going to try it again as an outro to our program. But
Okay.
Stephanie, congratulations. I hope that your obedience and your faith, and yes, even your fears, are used to encourage and inspire others to take that leap of faith, as you have so done. And as you so well said, the zeal comes later. What a testimony. We appreciate so much you sharing with
Thank
us.
you.
Oh,
Thank you.
all right. Well, I'm so glad we had some extra time tonight. What happened here? What just happened here? I pressed the button. I obviously did not click the mouse with enough conviction when I did that. All right. Well, thanks for hanging in with us. We don't usually go that long, but Stephanie really has so much to share, and we'll have even more in the days and weeks and months ahead. Okay. Before I try to make this outro, I want to leave you with a challenge. Here it is. What is the boldest thing that you have ever done in the kingdom of Christ? The second question then would be, well, when was that? And the challenge is to never be satisfied with either answer.
Are you a Christian who wants to go deeper into the roots of your faith? Well, you've come to the right place. Welcome to Grafted, Jewish Roots of Christianity. This is a podcast for Christians who want to understand the Jewishness of Jesus and His Word. I'm your host, Stephanie Pavlantos. I'm a bit of a Bible nerd. I'm also an author and a Bible teacher. In this podcast, we will stretch and maybe even challenge you to look at Scripture from a Hebraic point of view. We want to help you understand Scripture through the lens of the Hebrew language, culture, and history. Thank you for joining us.